Welcome to Sports Extra. I'm your host, Ali Gauhar. My guest today is truly a magnificent adventurer. She's the first woman ever to complete the Explorers Grand Slam. That's climbing the 7 highest mountains on each continent, plus reaching both poles in under a year. And now, on her third attempt, she became the first American woman to summit Pakistan's K2, the second highest mountain in the world, and by far the most treacherous. That really is an extraordinary achievement. So we're going to talk about this in the studio with her. I'm delighted to have here Vanessa O'Brien. Vanessa, great to see you.
Hi, assalamu alaikum.
I understand like mountaineering, climbing wasn't really in the family. This is something you had to learn. You weren't a natural.
No, not at all. In fact, I've in a way, I have sort of the wrong body type, body shape, all of that stuff. I think, a natural good mountaineer is probably like a good marathon runner. They're taller, leaner, their stride is greater. So when they, by being taller, when they take that step up, they cover more ground. When they take that stride forward, they cover more ground. I'm 5'4". So whether I'm on rock or ice or taking a step, I'm short. So, there's not a lot of, ground I'm going to cover. But to my benefit, I'm probably pretty much the size of a Sherpa. So that works in my favor in terms of the pace that we're going to go and the size that we are. But, the point with New Zealand was really to learn the technical side of climbing, alpine climbing, that is, which is, what is this with, with belay devices? What is this with crampons, helmets, the ice axe? How do these tools work? How do you approach a mountain? The different pitches, the steepness, all of that. And so really, I was just after Everest. I really had no intention to do anything else.
Yeah.
So, that was exactly what my sight was, and nothing else. So that's what I went after, and I had a good plan. I had previously climbed Kilimanjaro, which was, let's say, 19,000 feet. So I thought, okay, the way they sold Everest was base camp, Camp 2, or summit. And I thought, okay, well, I'm not qualified really to go to the summit, but let me get a little bit of experience about this mountain. So I signed up for Camp 2. And I figured Camp 2 is 22. I've been to 19 and a half. There's not much difference in that. I've now got the alpine mountaineering. Base camp is 17. Everything just seemed to make a lot of sense. And everything up to Everest Base Camp is just trekking, so that's fine. But I missed, and I had my straight red card because I missed the first thing out of Everest Base Camp was the Khumbu Ice Fall. And that's that 3,000-foot shifting dimensional, ice fall of these giant seracs, and a place where many of the accidents and avalanche, ice fall seracs and types of avalanches, accidents happen. And that would be my downfall because, I hadn't really taken that into consideration. I just thought right after Everest Base Camp, I'm on the mountain, and that's not the case. So, I ended up having and experiencing an ice fall serac avalanche in 2010. Becoming very hypoxic, developing pulmonary edema, and really having to go down. So I never made hit my goal of Camp 2. I had to eat an enormous piece of humble pie on the way down, and that taught me that alpine mountaineering was going to be a lot harder than I had bargained for. And that everything about it, from the training, the technical training, the high altitude medication, the way I was training, was all down to me, and that I was going to have to do things differently.
I was watching one of your interviews, and you said some very interesting things, and you were talking about what happened in 2010. That would have scared a lot of people. A lot of people, really. I mean, like, but you kept saying that, failure is actually something that's good for you.
Yeah.
And you learn from failure, and that's exactly what you did. It didn't move you away from mountaineering. It did the exact opposite.
Yeah, it did the exact opposite. In fact, if you read almost all the great entrepreneurial books, they'll tell you you have to fail first. In fact, it was so critical that I fail first because I really understood. It's like the light bulb went off at that point in time that it was 100% down to me. All of those critical levers were my responsibility. I couldn't outsource them. I couldn't outsource them to a Sherpa or to a high altitude porter or to anybody else. It was my responsibility. It was my responsibility how I trained. It was my responsibility how I learned about how my body responded physiologically to high altitude. It was my responsibility to learn about high altitude medicine. This was nobody else's job. I couldn't outsource this to somebody else. But failure is so important, and this is important in sports, but it's important in life, it's important in business, it's important in politics, it's important in almost everything that we do. It's okay to fail. You have to learn from your mistakes. You have to incorporate that knowledge so that you know what to do differently when you move forward. When I came down that mountain the first time in 2010, eating the humble pie, I made one promise, and that promise was that I would be back. But I would be back a much different and much stronger mountaineer. And in fact, when I did go back, by the time I went back, I had done Shishapangma and Choyoyu, 2 other 8,000-meter peaks, back-to-back summits 8 days apart. And in and of itself, back-to-back 8,000-meter peaks are almost unheard of. By the time I came back, I was ready. I was so ready.
So 2010 was a massive turning point.
Oh, it was a massive turning point.
That's when you knew that you had to get better, otherwise you wouldn't be able to go forward. Yeah. So you made that conscious decision.
I made the conscious decision, and it was okay. I wasn't signing up for the summit. I was signing up for Camp 2, but it was a huge learning experience. It was so important that it happened when it happened. And
was there ever a point where you thought, gosh, I can't do this? There must have been at some point where you thought maybe this isn't the right thing, but how did you snap out of it?
Well, I think there's elements of that happen all the time, not just one time. But big failures should happen early. I think they should happen early so that you have the right philosophy, which says what I'm about to undertake is bigger than me, and I need to really be humbled by this and make sure I undertake the right training for it. Yeah. Or you're a statistic. Not just in sports, but in anything. Failure is okay. I think failure gets a bad rap. As long as you learn from what you're undertaking.
And you have humility.
Oh, yes, absolutely. It's perfectly fine. There's so many quotes out there if you just Google it. So many famous quotes, how failure makes you stronger and all this great stuff. It's great. There's nothing wrong with it. I think it's fantastic. But you must learn from it. If you learn nothing, then it's a missed opportunity. It's true.
You also said in one of your interviews that you took some stuff that you learned from banking. 3 things, the 3 S's: speed, simplicity, and self-confidence. I found that very interesting because you can apply that to anything, really.
Yeah, and you know what? That's not mine. That's Mr. Jack Welch. And he taught me that because I spent my early years at GE and General Electric. At the time, it was sort of 49% of it was in financial services, which is the sector I worked in. Mm. Today, of course, it's 100% manufacturing. GE was, the original manufacturer of, refrigerators and, of course, light bulbs and, a very great company. But Jack Welch was very, very famous for being a phenomenal leader. He was very, very clear about what he wanted to do for each of his 12 manufacturing businesses and 25 financial services businesses. If you can imagine a conglomerate running a conglomerate. He ran the Century Bell on Wall Street for 100 years. Did phenomenal things to the stock price and the shareholders. I would say almost all the employees liked working for him. He built Crotonville, which is an amazing management institute where he himself taught on leadership principles. But those three always stuck with me because I think you're right. You can apply those to almost anything. And I think they work very nicely in the mountain as well. Speed speaks for itself. You're in a dangerous environment. It's not a place that you want to loiter or spend a lot of time. When we climb, we have very, very high, let's take Summit Day just for an example, but we have very, very high winds. They could be up to 50 kilometers. Precipitation in the form of snow. That wind is blowing the snow now. You have wind with low temperatures, so you have a wind chill factor, which could push to 40 below. That's Celsius and Fahrenheit parity. So it's cold, and you have objective dangers. So as the snow starts to accumulate, that could be avalanche danger. You're putting in fixed lines, so it's taking time to complete the summit bid. There's crevasse danger. You have rockfall. You have, in the case of K2, the big giant serac as you come up the couloir.
And climate change probably makes it more
difficult. Climate change is terrible. There's signs of it every year. It gets worse and worse. But that climate change, of course, makes the rockfall more predominant.
It probably comes at you really fast and like bullets, so you have to be extremely careful.
It's almost like a video game, and you see the giant serac, which is very famous up the bottleneck couloir, and we see signs of, I call it popcorn, but it's really erosion in that serac. So there's things that can fall. Ice can fall. You can slip. You can fall. Anyway, all of these objective dangers. So speed is good. You want to get up and out. You're also in the death zone. What does the death zone mean? That means that your body at those heights is no longer functioning at its highest capability. So there's cognitive failure to some extent. You're not thinking clearly. Your lungs are not getting the air that it needs. The brain is not getting enough oxygen. The digestion starts to shut down. There may be adrenal failure, things like that. So, really, the death zone is 8,000 meters or 26,000 feet. I like to say that, as long as your oxygen tank is ticking away, is the amount of time you want to be there and no longer. It's borrowed time. Just as you would say, want to dive underwater holding your breath, for any period of time. You're not meant to survive in that place. A good example is when I flew back from Skardu to Islamabad, the pilot announced that we are flying from Skardu to Islamabad. This is a local flight, 8,400 meters. And I said, that's lovely. I was just at 8,600 meters. You brought me down 200 meters. So, just to give an example, right? You're higher than you fly. So speed is great. Simplicity. Of course, keep it simple. Can you imagine if somebody rigs a rope or tries to rig a rappel device or gets so complicated, or gives you directions that you can't find, or it's a whiteout, or, simple is always better. I would like to think of an example where that's not true. I can't. Self-confidence, so important. Even when people are starting to climb and you're beginning your journey and it seems like, oh, this is, it's 5 miles up. This is so long. I'm never going to be able to do this 8 kilometers. What am I going to do? It seems like forever. And you have to break down the task. Or you get inside your head and the head starts to say, I can't do it. You start to lack the self-confidence. And then you just have to break it down. You have to say, look, 5 steps, 1 breath. 5 steps, 1 breath. You break it down to something very, 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 very simple, and suddenly you're at the summit.
So I get the feeling that you have to talk to yourself a lot, but I can't I mean, I can't even begin to imagine, because once you're climbing and you're in the middle of it, you're probably, I mean, no matter how much you've trained, no matter how much you've prepared, the conditions are harsh, they're treacherous. So, I mean, you're feeling tired, but at the same time, even though, I mean, you're feeling all this fatigue, at the same time, you have to think about so many things. And the most important thing to think about is your safety and your team members' safety. Is that something that you learn over time, or is that something that you had to learn when you were back in New Zealand, when they were training you? Is that something that it's ingrained in every mountaineer early on?
I think you mature as a mountaineer. I think you mature over time, and I think it depends to what extent you're involved in the leadership of the expedition.
Right.
So, in this case, for example, both myself and Mingma Galji Sherpa were the two leading the expedition. We were the last two to come down at night to make sure that everybody came down. The conditions were bad. We were climbing at night. The one thing I will say about this team is, K2 is hard. That's why it took 3 years to do, and there's no guarantee statistically since 1986, let's say there's 12 years of no summits. That means that there's a 40% chance that any 1 year would have, say, a no summit. There was no guarantee this year there would be a summit. But this team of 12 was very committed. They were experienced. As I looked around me, despite the conditions on summit day, as I looked around me, I had been to the North and South Pole. I had been to some really terrible weather places. I'm looking next to me, and there's John Snorri. He's from Iceland. He's not going anywhere. Next to him are 3 Chinese who have the coldest winters, and all of them had done 5 to, say, 13 of the 8,000 meters. They're not going anywhere. Then you have the Sherpa and the high-altitude porters. This team of 12 was so committed that, not only in the support of each other to make that summit, but to, ensure that they were going to give everything that they had to make this work. I am not sure that the other expeditions had that network this year.
They all turned back.
They all turned back.
All of them, in fact, yeah.
But I will say this, there is nothing wrong individually or collectively, if you were a larger expedition, in turning back, because since when is safety bad?
That's what I want to pick up on. I think I wanted to talk a little bit about Everest. Maybe we can get back to that, but I'm sure that gave you the self-confidence to keep going and the self-confidence to have a go at K2. Yeah. And you tried in 2015.
Yep.
You made it to Camp 2, if I'm not mistaken. It didn't work out.
Yep.
You tried the year after that. You got one step higher, Camp 3. That didn't work out either. And when you talked about that, like I said, I went through some of your interviews. I mean, you didn't see it as a failure. It was a learning experience that because of those 2 unsuccessful campaigns, you knew exactly what to do to get to the top. And what's more, the team that, as you quite beautifully described, the team with you was very experienced, but most importantly, extremely determined.
Yeah, very much so. And, I feel like every time I climb K2, I experienced a different K2, not only in the weather, the climate, the team, the dynamics. That first year with an El Nino year, there was no chance. It was too warm. We had the rockfall accidents, both which affected Samina Bag here in Pakistan and had hurt our head porter, Kami Sherpa, which involved a helicopter rescue. There was just no chance that there was a summit that year. This last year was interesting because the weather conditions were good, but when we approached Camp 3 and found an avalanche had taken out all oxygen equipment, supplies, it was hard to continue climbing after that. Statistically, I think 58% of all summits happened, say, in those last 2 weeks of July.
Right.
So, you could recover some of those equipment and supplies, but now you're in those last 2 weeks. The question is, do you risk trying to take another chance with limited, limited supplies, and then how wounded is the team psychologically.
Right. I mean, just to pick up a little bit on that, I mean, most people that do these things who are adventurers, mountaineers, describe themselves as danger junkies. Correct me if I'm wrong, you don't seem like a danger junkie to me. Yes, of course, there has to be some level of madness, if you understand what I'm talking about, to do this. But it seems as if you take calculated risks. You know exactly what you're doing. And as you quite rightly pointed out, there's no shame in turning back when you obviously can't go forward.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think if you want a successful career at something, you have to take the calculated risks. The problem is there's always an element of luck. Let's say it's a stacked bar chart of things, right? There's going to be a little stacked bar chart. One's going to be luck. There's a big chart that's acts of God. That's outside of your control. The weather-related stuff. Our forecasts are often incorrect and changing throughout the day. They changed for us throughout the day. Our summit there was 16 hours. They changed dramatically throughout the day, such that when I was talking to some of the Pakistani followers, and they said, I was praying the whole time, and I said, I know you changed the weather. Because sometimes the snow was so strong and suddenly it would go away. And it was that dramatic.
I'm going to ask you, this might be a bit personal, but a lot of people who climb say that when they get to a certain point and they're looking out and it's just absolutely beautiful. And during that time, they feel a spiritual connection. Did something similar happen with you?
I wouldn't say on the summit that was true, but before the summit, I did go up with a Swedish climber right underneath the Magic Line, which is a very technical route on K2. And he took me to a place that he thought was very spiritual. He had been there during the tragedy on 2008, I think, with the film The Summit, when 11 people died.
Right.
And there were three chortens, these like the stones that show the way. And there were some flags that were very, very old. They looked old. I don't know. Weather can make things look old. But I couldn't tell at first what they were because I hadn't seen them before, and we were pulling them out of rocks, and they looked like writing, like somebody had drawn something on a flag. And so I didn't want to disturb, or take them away. I took pictures of them, and then I took them down. Mm-hmm. And the Nepalese said, no, these were Nepalese prayer flags, and that was a hand-drawn picture of the wind horse. And then, as I was doing research, the early expeditions had come, of course, from the 1800s. And some of the first early ascents were always in the 1930s. And in fact, even Sherpa had come from Darjeeling. So they could have put flags up in this place. So I don't know really where the origins came from. But I remember trying to get to this place. And as I touched the rock, I said to the mountain, I said, do I have permission? Are you going to allow me? And even Frederick would say, no, don't touch that rock. It's not safe. But because I asked, and I would pull on it to pull myself up, and it held my weight. So over time, I was asking the mountain, will you allow me to climb?
You felt like you developed a relationship with the mountain.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Like, we have a puja ceremony, which is, what the Nepalese do before they climb to ask permission, forgiveness, and safe return. So there's always something. But this was a little bit special, and I was just saying, do I have permission to climb? Will you hold my weight? And, I'd try each stone, and the stone would hold my weight, and it would allow me to climb. And then sometimes, once I felt like I had permission, if the mountain was then acting badly, like say she had high winds, I would say, no, you invited me here. Why are you mad? now you have this temper tantrum.
You start arguing with the mountain
yes.
then.
And so then I thought, this is probably how men go mad in the mountains. Because they're left on their own for 2 months in a tent and they talk to the mountain. But anyway,
we go mad with or without mountains.
Yes.
Really.
So, it's one way or another, but it's, it's over 3 years, it's a very special relationship. And, also the glacier is a living, breathing thing. This is, it's like Gaia. It's part of Earth. It's, a river. And, I had done a lot of work with the Gilkey Memorial, which is a memorial to those who have lost their lives on K2.
How many people have lost their lives on K2?
84.
84.
And so last year with the leader of the British expedition, Di Gilbert, she and I and two of the liaison officers had gone in, and we looked at all the memorial plaques, and I had the master list of the 84 deceased, and we discovered that 20 people were missing. And the plaques are kind of like old dishes, and when people used to die on K2, they used to just punch the names and put a memorial, name and date of death. But when I found 20 people missing with Di, what we decided to do was try to find these old tin plates. And they're kind of these old military plates like that you would have found in Rawalpindi.
Right.
So Nazir Sabir's team took me up to Rawalpindi after the expedition last year, and we found them. And then I was able to engrave the 20 missing names. The question was, who was going to take them back? Because I didn't know if I'd come back a third year. So I was hoping for the K2 winter ascent, which maybe the Polish would do. When nobody came back, I ended up with the plates this year. And so I ended up taking them back this year to hang them.
Right, so. That's amazing. But no, I mean, this truly is fascinating stuff. And like you said, it took you a little bit of time to learn and understand the technicalities and how to, deal with all kinds of even emotional difficulties as well, mental difficulties that you experience when you're up there. And you said you really began to understand the glaciated environment in 2010. Yes. So this time around, the third time you were climbing K2, there must have been a point, and please correct me if I'm wrong, there must have been a point where you were worried about going back down, because it's more dangerous, I understand, going back down. And with your late summit, that must have been a concern.
Yeah, it was a huge concern. So, we left at 11 p.m. more or less the day before the summit, so on the 27th. I was worried probably the whole time, because pretty much when we started the approach up the couloir on the bottleneck, it started snowing. And I had heard Ed Viester speak, who happens to be the American to climb all 8,000 meters, maybe 6 months earlier. And he said he didn't deserve K2 out of all the mountains he climbed, because he climbed it with Scott Fisher, who was the one who died on Everest. And as they were climbing K2 in the final summit, and it started snowing, Ed could visualize all that snow piling up and the potential avalanche risk. But Scott lived in the the present, and he was like, oh, no, don't worry about it. Let's just go, we'll go fast.
Let's soldier on.
Yeah, let's soldier on. And so here I was, like, I heard that story, and now it was happening to me. And I thought, oh no, I'm now going to have the same story. I'm not going to deserve the K2 summit, because now look at the snow. But the whole time I was calculating how much precipitation versus how much progress were we making with the fixed ropes. How long was it going to take to get to the summit? The winds were incredibly high. Temperature was fine. I think we were dressed for that, but it just weighed on my mind. It was like I kept working on this like dotted line cross section of this chart trying to figure out, like, would I pull the plug? And looking at, like, the other climbers, how they were acting, like, in the line. And, you know, it was just not a terribly comfortable feeling. And it went on for 16 hours, so it was a long time.
When you were almost there, was there ever a point where you thought, did the conditions ever get so bad that you thought maybe we will have to turn back?
Yeah,
or did that
absolutely
never, or did that not enter your mind?
Nope, it absolutely entered my mind. I was wondering when to pull the plug several times. I talked about it with the Sherpa I was with. You know, it just, you know, we were holding a stick to the accumulated snow and trying to see, you know, what we should do. We knew we were going to come down at night. We didn't know how strong the headlight lamp batteries were. Coming down at night is difficult, you know.
I can imagine.
And I didn't know if people were going to, you know, I had high altitude medicine with me if there were any mistakes or accidents, but you don't want to get in that situation. There were people climbing without oxygen. That's more dangerous. We took risks. We took risk.
No, I asked that. I asked that again because I mean, you in 2015 you made it to Camp 2, then you went to Camp Higher, so there must have been this burning ambition to continue. But at the same time, I mean, by the way you're speaking, you were very conscientious about others around you, and that's something you have to take into account.
Yeah. No, we took risks. I was conscious of it. I was calculating almost the entire time. I thought several times of turning around, even though we might have been 600 meters from the summit. Other people have done it plenty of times. You know, there's always that fourth year, right? It was a very strong team. I was just weighing all this stuff in my head. You know, it just, I think I weighed it all in my head till we were there. And then I no longer had to weigh it in my head. But we did take risks. That's why I can only commend those that chose not to, because there's nothing wrong with safety, and you know, it's a personal decision. I thought that the team was strong enough and committed, and I didn't see any signs of anyone suffering anything that I felt was dangerous outside of an accident or an act of God on the way down. So it was something that I thought we could pull off, but it was risk.
Now, as best as you can, tell us about Summit Day and what it's like right at the top, because I'm sure people would love to know what it looks like.
Yeah, well, you know, first of all, despite those conditions, and sometimes it felt like going through Dante's Inferno, like you had to get through the circles to get to kind of, you know, this heavenly summit. But when we did pass the summit ridge, we were rewarded with the blue sky, and you know, that was phenomenal because we were able to take the pictures, and when you look down, you know, because of K2's triangular shape, you're able to see almost every camp. You can see down to the first base camp, but more importantly, the entire beautiful, you know, glaciers at the bottom. You know, Goodwin Austen, the Baltaro. You can see all of China, pretty much all the other big peaks. G1, 2, 3, 4. You can see Broad Peak across from you. It's stunning.
I mean, you're probably going through so much stuff at that very moment once you reach the top. I mean, you couldn't do it twice before. You finally managed to do it, so you must have been extremely emotional. You must have been relieved as well that you made it to the top. And at the same time, you know that you're about to go down, which is even more dangerous. So I can't even begin to imagine what you were feeling.
Yeah, so, you know, look, in a movie, you know, if we were on a Hollywood film set, you know, you jump up and down, you do high fives, and you'd be like, oh, we made it, and there'd be this big celebration, and, you know, you'd have this jubilation and all of this stuff. And, you know, the reality is, you know, for the mountaineers is we know that we're only halfway 50% halfway, I mean, that's such a small amount of progress, you know? So on the one hand, it's like, okay, great, we're here, and there's like a moment of pause where you say, okay, now you have to remember, like those 16 hours, you probably didn't stop, you didn't drink, you didn't eat, you didn't do anything, you know, even though you were standing around a lot. But even when you get up there, it's that, okay, quick, you know, acknowledge your surroundings because this is amazing and breathtaking. You're only going to be here once. Almost everybody had something, a summit flag, maybe a sponsor, something like that. You know, that's when that happens. But there's no like, have a seat, you know, take out your snacks, you know, let's have a chat, none of that. And 50% is 50%, you're only halfway. That's weighing on your mind. 85% of deaths happen on the way down, that's weighing on your mind. And despite, it takes some effort to go up, okay? There's effort, it's uphill. But let me tell you, it takes no effort to go down and to fall. You've got gravity now. It is so easy to slide down, to fall down.
And if you don't like rig your rappel device correctly,
exactly.
I mean, dire consequences. So these are all the things you have to think about.
It's so much harder. If you don't put in the rappel device correctly, you're out. If you don't clip in right, you're out. If you arm rappel off an old rope, you're out. I mean, there are so many hazards, and gravity's just pulling you. Come on down, pulling you down, down, down. So easy to fall. It takes no effort.
You must check your rappels all the time when you're going down.
So, you know, I can't even tell you, even the steps, you know, by then, you know, all that snow buildup, now mushy, you're falling down anyway. You know, it's just, it's terrible. It's really, really, really easy to fall. So the amount of concentration and focus now has to be on overdrive, double time. So if you even slightly burnt yourself up in those 16 hours trying to get there, you know, you've got to have that reserve. You've got to. And I completely understand, you know, we had K2 pub quizzes, you know, while we were there, you know. One of the questions was, who was the last person to die on K2? You know, everybody knew the name. Everybody knew how.
Right.
You know, Camp 4 exhaustion. So easy to sit down and never get up.
Vanessa O'Brien, this was absolutely amazing. You're clearly very, very passionate about this. It was coming across. I'm sure the viewers felt the same. Congratulations, and God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you. Pleasure.
That's all we have time for. Keep watching Sports Extra on PTV World. See you next time. Bye-bye.